According to Brian of Basketball World, which I accessed on July 7, 2023, at least 450 million people across the world play basketball, and China alone has an estimated 300 million people playing the sport. There are 213 countries in the world that have professional basketball leagues. Today I'm here to inform the students of Com 110 about the history of basketball. I will discuss the creation of basketball, the game's evolution since its creation, and its spread across the world. Now on to the main points. My first main point is the origin of basketball. Hoops Head podcast by an unnamed author, which I accessed July 7, 2023, states that basketball was invented by 31-year-old Canadian James Naismith in 1891 in Springfield, Massachusetts. Naismith was asked to create an indoor sport that athletes could participate in the winter to keep in shape. He used peach baskets and a soccer-type ball, and when he created it, basketball only had 13 rules. When he first created the sport, only 18 people showed up to class that day, and so he split the teams into 2 teams of 9. Originally, the baskets didn't have a hole in the bottom, so it took time to retrieve the ball because a worker had to go up with a ladder and get the ball out of the basket. Some of the original rules included a player can't run with the ball unless they were slowing down from running at a high speed. There was no pushing. The first infringement of this would be considered a foul, and the second would be a disqualification from the game until the next basket was scored. The third would be that a foul is considered striking the ball with your fist. The fourth rule is the game would consist of 2 15-minute halves with a 5-minute rest period in between them. The game spread very quickly across America. However, it took time to develop internationally and wouldn't become an Olympic sport until 1936. And the NBA would be formed 10 years later in 1946. I have just discussed my first main point, the creation of basketball. It's clearly changed a lot since then, so this is what leads me into my next point, the evolution of the game. Over the years, the play style and the game's rules have changed in a lot of different ways. According to Hoop Tactics by an unnamed author, which I accessed July 7, 2023, in 1897, 2 teams of 5 became the mandatory size, which is how the game is today. In 1920, whenever a player subbed out of the game, they were only allowed 1 re-entry. In 1934, they would change this to 2 re-entries per game, and in 1945, it became unlimited entries, which is how the game is today. In 1892, the baskets were changed to woven wire rims, and a year later, they became cast iron rims. In 1912, open nylon nets were approved. According to Junior NBA by an unnamed author, which I accessed July 7, 2023, backboards were added in 1895 to make scoring easier and to prevent people that were in balconies viewing the game from interfering with the ball. In 1916, they made it so that the backboard had to be at least 2 feet away from the end line because players would run up the wall to try and get an easy layup. And this would eventually be changed to 4 feet away, which is the current rules. In 1894, the first basketballs were made by a bicycle company rather than the soccer balls that had been used previously. These balls were better for dribbling and handling. The NBA added a 24-second shot clock to prevent stalling, which is how the game is played today. Traveling was originally considered a foul, however, this would eventually be changed in 1922. Free throws were added in 1894, but they were originally spaced 20 feet away from the basket, but this would eventually be moved up to 15 feet. Until 1901, players couldn't even bounce the ball. They had to pass, and if the ball did bounce, they weren't allowed to take a shot. In 1927, dribbling was even outlawed for a 2-week period. However, this would eventually be changed. From 1967 to 1977, dunking was banned in college games, mainly due to Lou Alcindor, who is more commonly known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar because of his dominance. This would eventually lead to him developing his signature skyhook, which he made famous during his playing career. I have just discussed my second main point, the evolution of basketball. My third main point is the spread of basketball across the world. As I stated earlier, China alone is estimated to have 300 million people playing the sport, and tons of other countries play it as well. Despite the fact that the game was invented in America, it has spread all over and become one of the most played sports across the globe. According to Washington Post by Lindsey Krasnoff, which I accessed on July 7, 2023, the 1948 Olympic Games illustrated the rest of the world's growing skill in basketball. Even though the US would win this year, a bunch of the other countries started to actually be able to compete and hold their own against the US. And this has transitioned into how the NBA exists today with 450 players, and 120 of those are considered to be international, which was stated by NBA.com by an unnamed author, which I accessed on July 7th, 2023. In fact, the past three individuals to win MVP in the NBA were internationally born players. I have just discussed my third main point, the global spread of basketball. From its invention in 1891, the evolution in its rules and play style, and its rapid spread across the world in just 132 years of history, the basketball has changed drastically, which is why 450 million people play and love the sport today.